Well, hello, writers. Welcome to Ink in Your Veins, episode number 409. I'm Rachael Herron, and I am so thrilled that you are here as I am here talking today to my friend Damien Pitter. We talk about the developmental edit and all things edit. So you are going to love this interview. Damien is such a kind person while really, really knowing his craft. And also, you will hear him blow my mind in a way I am never going to recover from. So that is coming up. Just a very quick intro today because I'm running a little late and I've got a lot of things to do today. But what is going on around here? I am thinking and working on that money book that I haphazardly announced last week. I am so excited about it. Nobody can write this one but me. I'm going to be contributing to the conversation in a way that only I can, and I do not have to be everything for everyone. And I'm saying that because it might be helpful for you to hear. A lot of times we get that imposter syndrome stuck in our head, in our ears, ringing that says, how can I tell a reader everything? How can I show them everything in this fictional world? Or how can I show them everything that I lived through in order to help somebody else? Or how can I tell them how to do something that I know how to do while making sure that they have everything? You can't. And it is such a relief when we remember that we don't have to. We are not the conversation. We are a voice in the conversation, and people opt in and opt out of listening to our voices. I am right for some people to read. Some people like my books, some people don't, and I do not mind. There are so many books out there that people love that I am not in love with. And then I read books and love them, and people tell me, I don't know how you even got through that. That is gorgeous, isn't it? So I just feel super excited. And I love this feeling of moving with joy into a project, even though I'm trying to finish up some other projects. I am in the editing phase of the audio for Unstuck, and yeah, it's a lot of work. It is the hard part of doing an audiobook is the editing. But I have hired a sound engineer to clean it up for me when I am eventually done. And then the Kickstarter will be ready to go. What else is going on? I think I felt like, oh, I just sent out an email to the writers. So if you're not on that list, please get on it. You can go to rachelherron.com/write and get on that list. I talked about why skipping ahead is one of the most excellent things you can do for yourself as a writer. If you are stuck, skip ahead. There are no writing police waiting for you to make a mistake. You do not have to finish the scene that you're stuck in. You do not even have to finish the sentence. You can choose to think about that scene for a little while longer and try some things. But if you are choosing to think about it and working on it and you're not moving forward and it's been days or even weeks, it is time to skip. Skip ahead. It is the most empowering thing we can do is to move toward our interest. And here's the thing. Once we write the thing that is sparkliest and shiniest or darkest or hardest or most exciting for us to write, much later when we're in revision, we almost always, not always, but almost always realize that the part we were struggling with was because it was somehow wrong. It wasn't serving us and it would have needed to be cut anyway. And our brains were throwing up these red flags that we were refusing to see. We will never believe that or understand that when we're in an early draft, a first or a second draft, because we still are believing that this scene is important and here's why. And you can tell the 10 reasons why. It's just that you don't know the book enough yet. You're still learning the book because you're still writing it and revising it, probably for the first time, which is when a lot of things change. And yes, that scene really does seem important now. And we cannot tell that later it will not be important and it will be something that you can gloss over with a sentence or remove entirely. So trust yourself. If you're bored or stuck, skip ahead. You do not have to connect anything. Transitions don't matter. Those are for late revision. You can change everything right in the middle of your book and keep going. Keep moving forward. Don't go back to fix. Keep moving forward. Make yourself some notes of how to fix it later when you've finished the draft. Ooh, there's my little soapbox that I got up onto. Let us talk about uh, someone who is not on a soapbox, but who I hold in very high regard. I'm so excited to talk to him. After teaching students to understand and write stories for more than 20 years as an international educator and counselor, Damien Pitter now has a small business editing and coaching adult writers to help them find and tell their stories. Educated in Canada, Damien studied film, theater and education, and then earned an MFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia. As the child of Jamaican and Chinese Jamaican immigrants, his interest in different stories led him to live and work in 6 countries on 4 continents, while his work as a counselor taught him the power that story has to shape our reality. He lives with his partner, novelist Mona McDermott, in Yokohama, Japan, and on the South Shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. You can find out more about working with him at damienpitter.com. You're going to love this. Hold on to your socks. Here we go. Happy writing, my friends. Well, I could not be more pleased to welcome my friend to the show. Will you please share your name and your pronouns with us?
Yeah, I am Damien Pitter. I'm he, him. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here.
I am delighted to have you. We know each other through your amazing partner, Mona McDermott, who is
Mhm.
frequently mentioned on this show. She is amazing. And you are amazing. And you're both writers. You are 2 writers in a long-term partnership. And today we focused on Mona here before. We're going to focus on you today. And specifically, we're going to talk about editing, developmental editing. But before we get into that, which is something that you do, I would love to ask you kind of what generally is your backstory as a writer?
Yeah. Um, so really, I think I maybe became a writer when I saw Star Wars when I was 4 years old, and just fell in love with stories.
Oh, that's so
And
cute.
constantly thereafter making up stories in my head, and then slowly it's been a slow process of formalizing, that impulse, I think. So I became a teacher first. Is that what I did first? No, I studied film first in university,
Uh-huh.
and then I became a teacher while I was studying film. Then I went and became a high school teacher, worked internationally teaching stories. But again, that was mostly about like just being in love with stories and wanting to teach people how to write stories and how to teach people how to understand them. And the more of that I did, I started thinking more about and interacting with people and kind of interacting with their stories. So I became a counselor, to have the opportunity to really think about people's actual stories and the
Mm,
way that story shapes our lives. I think story it's not just an entertainment, it's a cognitive structure, right? It's how we
mhm.
make meaning of the world. So help working with people to think about what their stories are and how having a slightly different story can give them a slightly different experience, and hopefully a better one.
Mm.
So stories have always been really important to me. And then I find at this part of my life, I'm focusing more on working with writers, who are trying to put their stories in the world, and whether that's their own story in memoir or fiction. I've been a long time sort of science fiction and fantasy fan, so I do that stuff. But I'm also really interested in literary fiction and really all kinds of stories. So
Yes.
yeah,
And
that's what I've been doing.
full disclosure, I should mention that you and I have worked together. You have helped me with my
Yeah,
developmental editing too. So you have been doing this. You've got an
and
MFA
have been a
from
student in your class.
That's I always forget that. I always forget. Gosh, that feels so long ago because in my mind, yes, I know that, but also you and I have been frequent students together in Mona's classes. And I just, in
Most
my
classes,
mind,
it's
you
true.
and I sit next to each other and we look like this at Mona as she as she tells us, as she teaches us things. So fantastic. So you're using all of this education, you got your MFA, you've got all of this background knowledge, and now you're putting it you're putting the tires on the pavement and doing this. Um, when we talk about developmental editing, it's one of those things that is so scary to newer writers, especially if it is their first time getting developmentally
Mhm.
edited. I had an episode with Eileen Lambert on this show where she talked about receiving that first set of developmental edits and how it can kind of cause this nuclear explosion in a writer's life and psyche almost. But I want to talk a little bit about that and how you approach that, but also just starting at a higher 30,000 foot level. What is the difference between the editing levels? We talk a lot about like story consults versus developmental edit versus copy edit, line edit proofing. Could you just talk us through that?
Sure. So I think if you think about from inception to kind of the end, the inception of a story it's just an idea. It might not even, you might not even know if it's a story yet. There's something interesting, a series of events. Even if you think about like a memoir, basically all you have is somebody's life, right? It's
Mhm.
just, and that's just Monday, Tuesday to Friday over and over again.
Mhm.
So you may have the idea that there's something interesting about that that's worth telling as a story, but you may not know what the story is yet. So that's where sort of the story consult or the book coaching sort of aspect of things comes, is helping you sort out, where's the story? What is the story? What is it actually about? Which events are relevant to the story and which ones are not really part of the story at all? What's the general order of things? How does, is there a story there to tell? And then
Love
once
it.
you actually have a draft, you figured out there is a story and you've written something. You've got something that sort of has a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's sort of there. Then you're looking at something which is more like a developmental edit, which is taking a look at that and saying, okay, so let's really shape this into a story. We've got the ideas, we've got the overall direction, but it's like, I liken it to building the structure of a house. If a developmental edit was a house, you'd be like putting the framing up. Um, and so you've got a structure, that the second floor will be held up by the first floor, and the third floor will be held up by the second floor. It's not all going to fall down. You have an arrangement of the rooms and spaces, how to move, through that structure. It doesn't have any walls yet. It's all just framework, but that's also a good time that if you discover, the living room is in the wrong place, it's not too late to move it.
I've actually
You don't
never
have to undo a lot of stuff to shuffle it around.
I've never thought of this on like the real um tangible part of this analogy because I've heard this before, but I've never really thought about how expensive it would be if you build this house and never think about structure and then outfit it, paint it, put in all the furniture. And that's exactly what we do when we make our sentences pretty and our paragraphs gorgeous, but we don't know what the book is
Yeah.
actually trying to be or how to hold it up. And then really thinking about that house where the guy comes or the person comes in and says, "You have no bathroom and you have four kitchens in the basement." Like what's
Yeah.
so the developmental edit is when you say, let's talk about what this house or this book wants to hold and how can you best build this house to suit your purpose. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Um, and to do that in a way where, as I said, if you have to make big changes, you don't have a dumpster that's full of handmade Moroccan tile that you've just had to pull off the wall, right? Like that you worked really hard to put up and build, and it's gorgeous,
Exactly.
and now it's in the dumpster.
Yeah.
Don't do that yet.
That's, that's
Move the rooms
perfect.
around first. Make sure you've got everything where it is, where it wants to be, and then you move forward with your next draft. You're like, okay, so your developmental edit is done, and the next level is the copy edit. And the copy edit is like, you've got all your drywall up, you've got all the things, all of the pieces are in, and you've kind of got some finishing stuff going on. And you're trying to make sure that it's all consistent. You want to make sure that this house all feels like it's supposed to be the same house, that you don't walk out of one room and feel like you've just walked into a different time period, or you've walked out of one room in the Palace of Versailles and suddenly you're in, I don't know, a mid-century modern
In
shag
LA or
carpet
something. Yeah.
flag situation or something, right? Like, it should all kind of feel like the same place. So you're looking at things like, you know so in writing terms, it's like, are the voices of your characters consistent? If your characters speak with a particular dialect, are they doing that all the way through the story? um uh Consistently in settings and things like that, and even in at the level of language, sentence variety. uh do the sentences flow from one paragraph to the other? Have you used the same word many times? We all have words that we rely on, words that as we're writing, they're just crutches.
And
We
we
can't think of anything
cannot see
better,
them.
and
We can't
those
see
words
them.
come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can't see them. So one of mine is really. I use really
Oh,
a lot more than I need to use it.
yes.
And I don't even notice that I'm writing it.
Mine is
Uh,
just, I always do a highlight on mine, and just and actually are two of them, which are actually I don't even like using that one. But one time I did the control F to highlight them all, and I had seven on one page, seven just. It was just like the yellow, yellow, yellow everywhere. Okay, so that's part
yeah.
that all folds into copy editing. And
Mhm.
you do all three of these things, right? You do the story
Yes,
consult
I do those three
and the
things. Yeah.
developmental and the copy edit.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you a question, and please feel free to argue with me or to push back, but I'm
Sure.
going to tell you what my opinion is about those three, and then you tell me whether you agree or not. I
Mhm.
think that the story consult is a nice to have, but optional, and it can often help people out if they're feeling nervous or timid. Um, but I feel like the developmental and the copy edit are non-negotiable for a writer. Like I feel like you got to have those in some way, shape, or form. Now, you please tell me what you think.
I tend to agree. It depends. I mean, yeah, I think it depends on your level of comfort. I think, the consult of the book coaching, as you say, I think for some people, that's the thing they need the most because once
Yeah.
they have the confidence of that and understanding, like if they have an understanding of what their story is and where it goes, then the other parts become much easier. Um, but I think even for those of us who've been writing for a while, like the developmental edit, it's about those things that you can't see because you're in it, right?
Mhm.
So you may feel really confident about your story. You may feel like I've killed it. It's there. I've got it. Um, but there are things that you read it and you're reading something that's not on the page because it's in your head and those are your words and they mean the same thing to you. And it
Mhm.
takes having somebody else look at it to say, oh, that's not what you said at all. And to be able to say, to put big question marks on the page and say something's missing here, I don't know what
Yeah.
this is, or
That
because there's
is
just things that you just can't see.
that's an interesting thing about the developmental editor. I feel like you might always be looking for what isn't there and what is there too much, because that's what a writer can't see. And when I always feel like when a developmental editor doesn't comment on my page, I just love it if a page can go by with no comments on it. Love it, because I feel like I hit it right. But then when the dev editor says, you've said this seven other times, and I think it's my first time, or they say, how did you get there? Because they don't see everything that I put in and taken out, but I've forgotten that I took it out.
Right. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
And I think
yeah.
one of the most useful things the developmental editor can do is just ask questions to say,
Mm,
uh, here it feels like you're leaning towards this idea
yeah.
here, or if you're leaning towards this idea, then these might be some things that would help shade that in because it feels a little vague. But if you're going this way, maybe you want to do these other things. I think
Yeah.
a really good editor will leave the control with you. They're not going to
Yes.
say change this, but it's a question of like, if this is what you're going for, maybe these things would help, and if this is what you're trying to do, then that would be more helpful,
That is one of my
I
favorite
think.
things, is when a developmental editor points something out that is sometimes that is really big and really difficult, and I have no idea how to do it. And when the editor points it out and they say something like, this is the problem, this is what's not here or what is here, and I don't know how you're going to fix it, but I know that you can. And have you thought about, this thing over here might be a connection? And they almost hand me this golden chalice that only I can drink, or this, I'm the only one who can pull that sword from the stone. And I'm happy to say that I've never had a developmental editor with really heavy. Oh, I've had one. Never mind, one heavy-handed developmental editor, and I'm still scarred. And you know the one, but but everyone else has always handed me that as an invitation, like really keeping a close eye on the fact that it's, these are our books, and the developmental editor helps us figure out how to fix them. They don't fix them for us, which I think some people are sometimes surprised about. The editor will fix my book, right?
Mm.
Oh,
Yeah.
sadly, no. They will not. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, what are recurring developmental editing issues that pop up all over the place for many people?
I think overall structure is
Yeah.
is one, and I think structure is a tricky thing. Is I think particularly as like young writers. I remember being in film school and like everybody wants to come in breaking all the rules. Like they want to,
Right.
they
Right.
want to write the film that's not been made before or tell the story
Yeah.
that's never been told. So they're all about like, let's tell the whole story backwards. Let's I remember when we went, Seven, David Fincher's movie
Oh yeah.
Seven came out and we were so excited about it. And we went in, we were raving about it to our prof. And we're like, even the credits roll backwards. That made him laugh very hard. Uh, but I think when we think about structure, it's hard to avoid, even if because what you're actually structuring is you're structuring the reader's experience of the story. You're not actually structuring the story itself, so that you can tell the story backwards. You can
Oh.
tell it in nonlinear fashion. You can start wherever you want, but the reader's experience is always going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end in
You
that
just
order.
you just blew my mind. You blew my mind in a that seems so basic now that you've said it. You've just turned on the light bulb that should have always been on. But that's exactly right. The reader's experience will always have a beginning, middle, end. No matter how you structure the story, you must also structure their experience.
Right.
Say more, say
So
more.
the so even if and that reader's experience is what we're talking about when we're talking about sort of 3-act structure or 5-act structure, whatever, however many acts you're
Mhm.
sort
Yeah.
of putting it into, it has the same elements to it, right? As a reader, you have to start the story. You need some background to get going. You need some kind of introduction. There has to be a moment when the story actually starts, where there's some sort of conflict or question or some sort of unresolved problem, like something has to happen. These are things that have to happen, and they're all common, to the reader's experience. As I said, how they unfold in the chronology of the story you're telling can be quite different, and that's the part that can look really unconventional and really interesting, and be all very abstract, whatever. But the experience that the reader is having is still a pretty linear, beginning to end sort of story. There's going to be some sort of climax near to the end where they are the most engaged and the most curious about what happens, and
And
some sort of resolution.
never be able to
Yeah.
have to you will never be able to make a reader experience the end, middle, beginning ever. It's
No,
unless time starts rolling backwards, we will not be able to. That is so
exactly.
good, Damien. I love that. Okay, so one of the things I frequently ask people here is to share a craft tip for writing, and I wanted you to do that. And you can do this as a developmental editor, or as a writer, or as both. What you got for
Sure.
us?
I've been looking at a bunch of my own short stories because I'm thinking about putting together a collection of those. So I've been going back
Ooh,
and looking at a lot of old stories.
yeah.
Um, and this is something that I've been kind of paying attention to is I don't know what to call it really, like landmarking or time stamping. If you're writing in the past tense,
Hmm.
uh, and that you're sort of like your default position is in the past tense.
Hmm.
And sometimes when you're writing in the past tense, then you need to describe something that happened before that. So then you're
Right.
going before this, right?
Or
So now
you could
you're
use
into the
past
you're into the past
perfect.
perfect,
Right.
right? So I did, and then I had done.
I had done. Yeah.
And if you need to go into conditional, it could be I may have done or could have been or whatever. Once
Could
you
have
put
done.
in
Yeah.
layers of that together, it can get very confusing,
Yeah.
as to where you are. So I think one of the things is to build in little signposts for the reader that are connected to the setting or whatever it is from the
Uh,
time that people are speaking in, so that as you shift between those things, uh, there are clues as to which past tense is currently speaking, like which one has control. So here I've got like a very little example for you.
Perfect.
So um, I went to the bar and bumped into Sandy. Hello, stranger, I said. We'd met at a party. I was delivering pizza and she'd answered the door and invited me in. She was kind and she laughed at all my jokes. I liked her instantly. What are you doing here? She shouted over the din.
Ah,
So this is really confusing because what's intended is that the what are you doing here is in the first level of past, like
but
the
we don't know that when
starting
her
level of
mouth
past.
opens, it could be
Sure,
with the
because she
pizza,
could be
right?
at the party.
Right.
Right. So you don't know which one of those uh, past tenses you're in. Um, so if you tag them, you could say, "Oh, I went to the bar and bumped into Sandy. Hello, stranger," I said. We met at a party in college. I was delivering pizza, blah, blah, blah. I liked her instantly. And then you've got to come back with a landmark to say, the bar was louder than usual. What are you doing here? She shouted over the din. So that you've brought the reader back to the right time frame. And this is mostly a concern when you're writing in the past tense. Because
But
if you're writing in the present tense,
that was such a
I go to
subtle,
the
easy
bar and run
fix.
into Sandy.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I go to the bar and run into Sandy, hello stranger, I say, we'd met in college, blah, blah, blah. I liked her instantly. What are you doing here? She asks.
Right.
The tense automatically cues you into, where you are. You don't have to worry about kind of placing those landmarks because you're not sort of layer on layer on layer into the past. But yeah,
But
that's the
but
thing I've been
thinking,
kind of looking at in my
I love
stories
that.
and trying to figure out.
And it's simple. It's simple and easy to do. And when you do it, it's one of those beautiful things in writing, I think, that becomes invisible. The reader doesn't notice it. The reader does not notice. They don't, a reader will never notice not getting lost.
Right.
They will
Right.
only notice when they're
They'll only
lost.
notice if they get lost. Yeah.
Exactly. So that
It's
is
also something I
brilliant.
think I was thinking this is also because a lot of my background is in film and television. You don't really have to worry about this as much in film and television because
Ah, yeah,
you're seeing it. You're
right.
seeing that they're in the bar, right?
Yeah.
So uh, there's like another sort of 80% of information that's not the words, that's telling you the rest of the story in other kinds of media. But when you're writing, you have to create the entire picture and carry the reader with you every time you shift.
No, no big deal. That's just what we have to do. We have to do all that, right? But one thing I want to reassure people, especially if they're writing their first drafts right now, or even struggling with their second drafts, is these are things that personally I don't try to do well in an early draft. So if anyone's listening and is
Yeah.
freaking out, like I don't do that, this is not only something we can work on in revision, but these are the things that a developmental editor points out to you and says, I got confused here. And then I always say that an editor has never told me something I didn't actually really know already. They don't ever surprise me. They're like, oh, you're right. I didn't do that there. I did that badly there. Okay, how am I going to
Yeah.
fix that? So
Yeah.
my
I
I
think
want
your only job in the first draft is to get done.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And to get as done as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Oh, I have so many questions for you, but I want to make sure that I want to hit the important ones. Okay, this one is big. How should a writer prepare for receiving developmental edit notes? And let's talk about a person for whom this is maybe only their first or second time they've ever gotten developmental edits. How should they
Mm.
prepare?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things is it's nice, and I know that editing relationships form in different ways, but if you have an opportunity to have a conversation with your editor before they do the edit, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's like whenever you're asking for feedback, it's really helpful to tell people what kind of feedback you're looking for,
Yeah.
and how it is helpful for you to receive that feedback. And that's good for both parties, right? Because I don't think anyone wants to give you feedback that you can't use. That's
Hmm.
not a good use of anybody's time.
Yeah.
You want to be able to provide people with feedback that they're actually able to hear, um, and that's going to help them move forward. So if you can have a conversation about that, and if you know about yourself, I'm going to need to hear like 3 good things before there's any criticism at all. Then
And
just say that
and that's
because
okay,
you can do
right?
that.
You can
Yeah,
ask
because as an
for what
editor,
you
you can
need.
be like, yeah, I
Yeah.
can I can lay out 3 great things before we get into anything. That's no problem.
Yeah.
That's just shifting the order around. It's all good.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think if you can prep your editor for that, I think is one thing. And then the other thing I think is just that idea, like remembering that you own the story. Like whatever anybody else says, this is your story.
Mhm.
Um, and that you have the solutions. The most valuable thing that the editor is going to point out to you is where there might be problems. The solutions are still yours to come up with. I wrote a story in my MFA workshop, and 4 or 5 different people stumbled over the same problem in the story, and each of them had a different solution to it. And they all, many of them thought that this element should be taken out of the story. But the useful thing was like, okay, I had to look at that part to figure out like why it tripped up 4 out of 5 readers. And then I ended up coming up with a solution, which was like they wanted me to take it out, and I ended up adding more of that element because it felt to me like it was there and it felt right that it was there, but it was like, okay, if it feels wrong to them, it's because there's not enough of it.
Mhm.
So just coming up with a solution which nobody in the workshop had suggested, or like hadn't come from any of the editors, but that was a flag. And that was the most important thing that came up out of the edit was, here's the thing you need to pay attention to and figure out like why it's important to you and how to make it work.
Oh, and that
But
is
the solution is your own.
because you are the boss of this story. You are its creator. And there's that beautiful word stet. And I always make a fist when I say stet because someday I want to like a tattoo that says STET. And then over here I wanted to say AWK period. Stet and awk. I think those would be cool knuckle tattoos. But stet means in Latin, I believe, let it stand. And the author always gets to say stet. It's I'm gonna leave that misspelled because I want it misspelled. The author is always
Yeah.
the one in charge at the end, but our work needs other eyes. And it needs them at the correct time. So what my almost penultimate question for you. Um, when's the best time to hire a developmental editor? It's a huge question and probably impossible to answer, but what do you think?
Well, I feel like you need to have a full draft,
Mm.
and maybe even after your second draft, because I think your first draft is, well, if your first draft is like my first draft, it's a bit
Like
messy.
most, yeah.
Um,
Hot
and
mess.
it may even have become a different story by the time you get
Yeah.
to the end of it. So I
Yeah.
think going through when you feel like you actually have a draft, which is like one story from beginning to end, and you think it's kind of there, then I think
Mhm.
it's a good time to go to a developmental edit and have somebody else look at it and say, are all the pieces here and are they in the right order? And do we get through the story at the speed, the pace that we probably should, and things like that. So I think that's probably a good time um, to do it.
I'm kind of grinning because I just realized that my own personal answer to that is I want a developmental editor when I finally think that this is the one time a developmental editor will write me back and say, "No, you know what? You're good. This should just go to copy edits. You're great." It's never happened and it never will happen. But when I get to that point, I have run out of ideas. I don't have anything more and I need outside help. So that is
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay. And where can we find you? How can we hire you if we are looking for someone as awesome as you? I do want to say, for the record, you are thorough, you are so good at your job, and you are also immensely kind. And that's why I wanted you on the show because I believe
Thank you.
in truth and kindness, and those two things together, unstoppable. So, where can we find you if we want to hire you?
DamienPitter.com. D
DAMIEN,
A
right?
M Yeah, DAMIENPITTER.com.
And I will say
And
that
there's a
your rates are still low because you're gearing up here, and also you charge in Canadian dollars. So
I do.
for the Americans in the house, you're a deal. You're a deal, and I'm going to encourage you to put up your rates ASAP. But for now, people should reach out.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm
Yeah.
so happy to talk to
Also,
you.
I think I'd like for editing to be affordable.
Yeah,
I think it's important for people to be able to work with someone. And if
yeah,
you're writing your first novel and it's not a job yet, and it's not
yeah.
making you any money, it's just something that you're doing. I don't think that the editing cost should be prohibitive. I think it would be good if there's somebody who can give you a hand and get you further along the road than to a place where maybe that book can make you some money.
Yes. Damien, thank you so much for talking to me today. This has been a delight, and I have been so excited to get you on the show. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you.